It's the first edition of Frontier Opening Bell this week. I'm Temple Ashaju. Thank you, Jim Maukadeke, Consumer Goods Analyst from Vertical Capital Management, for joining us on the show, and Ayodeji Ebo, joining us as the Head of Retail Investment for Chapel Hill Denham Advisory Bank. Thank you, gentleman and lady, for coming through on the show this morning. Happy Easter to you. I hope you had wonderful holidays as well. So let's move on now and kick off with the markets, where Nigeria was down up until Thursday last week by 33 basis points. You got the BRVM Stock Exchange in Ivory Coast marginally lower by 0.02%. That was for Monday. You also had the Cairo Stock Exchange, or the Egyptian Stock Exchange, represented based in Cairo, down by 1.54%. Kenya, where the Nairobi Stock Exchange was up, surged by some 1.30% on Thursday before the holiday, and the Johannesburg Stock Exchange also had a jump by 1.13%. That's for the Thursday before the Easter Good Friday holiday, and of course you had Easter Monday. So now let's look at the East African headlines, where you've got the International Monetary Fund approving some 3-year, $2.34 billion credit facility for Kenya. This is something that has been in the works before now. You have Kenya's revenue collection surpassing March targets by 6 billion Kenyan shillings. The Ugandan government also to raise 35 billion Ugandan shillings from motor vehicle licensing. Tanzania, Mozambique Inc. 2.4 billion shillings broadband deal. Angola targets some $67.4 billion investment in oil concession. Let me begin with you, and to see how we can get your thoughts on these headlines from the eastern part of Africa. Jim Maukadeke.
Thank you very much, Temple. So I think I'll be speaking on the revenue collection activities by the Kenyan government. So we can see that from the headlines, they were able to surpass their March revenue collection target by about 6 billion naira. There was a kind of breakdown as to why that happened. Was as a result of increased or better compliance in revenue collection methods. So I think it's something that we need to look more into in Nigeria. For example, I can see that they also were able to collect get approval for a 2.34 billion credit facility for their country. And if you look at the relationship between their relationship between debt and revenue, if you also look at the relationship between debt and GDP, you can see that, or from a quick Google check, you can see that their debt to GDP ratio is about 66% or 67%, which is way higher than Nigeria's debt to GDP ratio. But I don't think that's even what is important to look at this point, because many investors or many credit giving facilities will most likely not really focus on your already existing debt, but focus on how likely you are to pay back. So they're focusing on your revenue collection methods, or how you're able to generate more revenue to pay back. So if we're able to see results like this, that they're able to reach and surpass their revenue collection targets, then it bodes well for investors. Investors are more interested in giving out these loans to these countries. So in contrast, comparing it to Nigeria, I know that last I checked, we haven't really been able to meet our revenue collection targets, right? And even though our debt to GDP ratio is quite small compared to other African economies, it is not very easy for us to get debt based on this revenue metric that many investors are using. So I think it's a very welcome development for Kenya. I think that if they're able to continue on this trend, we should see them making a fast recovery in 2021, as has been doing the recoveries.
Thank you very much for this wonderful comments there, Kim. We also have the honor of Agnes Gital, the managing partner at TBS Africa, joining us now for this conversation as well. Agnes, thanks a great deal for coming through this morning. And let me quickly ask you about the relevance of this loan to Kenya, which the IMF has just approved. We understand that it is intended to help reduce debt vulnerabilities. It is also expected to help them support the next phase of COVID-19 response at this point in time. How much of these objectives can we expect as Africans from the implementation?
Thank you very much, Temple, for having me. It was also great to hear Chimna mention, talk a little bit on Kenya debt levels. I think the administration in Kenya would be very much like to hear your statement, because everybody in Kenya feels that we are heavily in debt. We think that we shouldn't be borrowing more money, and the fact that we are at 66% per debt levels is quite high, and we think it's not manageable. However, I think it's a sign, as Chimna say, is a sign that Kenya's credit profile is good enough. And but what's the most surprising for me is that IMF has in the past warned Kenya about debt management and our rising debt levels. And yet they continue lending Kenya money. And the sentiment of many in Kenya is, it's not even about the money we are borrowing, it's what the money is used for. Yes, you have very great statements saying that this money will go towards economic recovery post-COVID, it will go towards infrastructure development. However, many of us know that this doesn't always end up, there's a lot of wastage, and it always doesn't, and also lack of accountability. It doesn't always end up being used for the purposes it's meant for. So that's a concern for most of us, but also in line with the story on Kenya's revenue collection. That's a good story. And another headline from World Bank this week has shown that Kenya is is on record to be one of the leading countries that will lead recovery post-COVID. And I think this is also shows the management of the country, I guess the management of the Kenya Revenue Authority, making sure that despite the challenges of COVID, they are knocking on our doors and making sure that we pay our taxes. I think that's quite good, and also confirming what Chimna says, that if we can collect our revenue and manage it well, then obviously creditors will see Kenya as a profitable or better, a good country to lend money to. But the onus is on us. How do we use that money? Where does that money go to? And are we able to account for every penny, so that Kenya can recover from COVID?
Thanks a great deal. I mean, this is a major lesson for Africans generally to learn from, because again, as part of the headlines that we have under the East African markets, there you have Ugandan government seeking to also raise 5 billion Ugandan shillings from motor vehicle, and of course, we understand that they're looking to also raise some more funds by way of borrowing, even though the Auditor General or Accountant General recently made a comment saying that they're also hitting the ceiling at this point in time, and it is very, very important to be very, very conscious with the way African governments raise funds. Thanks a great deal for those comments, Agnes. I appreciate them. Let's move on now to the Western African headlines, where we've also got IMF latest World Economic Outlook 2021 expected to be released today. In Nigeria, Asman Air starts implementation of its corrective action plan. Agric imports up some 5.75% to 532.39 billion naira. That's, of course, in Nigeria as well. You got Togo, Sulu Bank reporting the profit after tax of 249.59 million CFA in 2020. Baobab Microfinance Bank, which has also got a bit of footprint in Nigeria, is expected to raise some 26.24 billion CFA to firm up its footprints in Cote d'Ivoire and, of course, in Senegal. Ayodeji, let me come to you with these headlines right here in West Africa. Make your pick, and then I'll come to Chima for some analysis as well.
Okay, I think that I would start with the IMF outlook, and we notice always a periodic review, and most times what we see is the circumstances evolve, and that has always been influencing most of the forecast. So we know that part of what would influence this forecast would be the vaccination. We've also seen in terms of the numbers of COVID affected people also decline significantly in Nigeria, and business is almost returning to normal in terms of opening up of the economy. So we believe that I won't be surprised to or I would say we won't be surprised to see a raise in terms of our forecast for Nigeria in this new report, and even for the globe entirely. We can see within, when you look at the UK, had a lot of cinemas were open for the Easter break, which uh, is also a sign that things are returning to normal. So I think that's going to be a major factor. Oil prices for Nigeria, it's been, when you look at how it impacts on Nigeria revenue, it's been up within the last 3 months, which would also be positive for government revenue. So I think by and large, I think it's we believe that there will be an upward review across the continent, and that's what we expect to see. But also looking at the agri imports, be up by about 5.7%, and export is down. It's really very concerning, and because what if we're importing more, it means we're generating jobs for people outside the country, and we know one of our major problems, and which is leading to more insecurity in the country, is on a high unemployment rates. So we need to now be deliberate to implement. So I won't even say coming up with new policies. It's for us to be very deliberate that we really want to solve this issue, and for us to be able to generate more jobs. Even when you look at the agri sector alone, that they look across the value chains. You have the storage, you have the processing. We can be deliberate to create a lot of jobs within this, rather than just focusing more on planting, and by the time they harvest, they are unable to store, and you see that continued fluctuation. But I think by and large, we just need to see how we reduce the import, which would also favor CBN, because the more demand the more demand for efforts to import what we can produce, the more also the pressure on Naira.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Chima, quickly, can I get your thoughts on some of these headlines? I would also like to hear subsequently from Agnes regarding her expectations from the IMF when the report is going to be released later today. So Chima, you first, and then I'll come to Agnes quickly.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say that I agree with what IDG said on the IMF's outlook expectation for global expectations, especially for Nigeria. Although I still think that while we're able to see positive oil prices, although our outputs has been regulated to reduce by OPEC. I think we can still make up for the shortfall by positive prices that we've been seeing. So although that is positive for us, we still have a lot of work to do in terms of vaccination. While we have about 4 million doses of vaccines that got into the country and people have been getting vaccinated, I think the stat I saw is that total vaccination is about 25% of total vaccination disbursed is about 25% of the 4 million doses that got into Nigeria. And one reason for that is that people are not really trustworthy of the vaccines. You speak to a lot of people on the streets, and they think that the vaccine is harmful or may be harmful. Somebody was speaking, oh, you take it now, but you don't know what will happen to you in 5 years. And so there's that fear of, we don't really want to take the vaccine at this point. So I think that if we're unable to make much progress with vaccinations, we may not be able to see the economy return to the way we are expecting it to see, and may not see a lot of investors keen on coming into the country because they will be wary. So I think we still have a lot of education to do in terms of the vaccination. Also, quickly just to speak on this Baobab raising to 26.24 billion CFA. I'm not very familiar with the fund, but what I know is that I see that it's trying to improve its expansion into other West African countries, which I think is in line with the AfCFTA. We can see that Access Bank is doing this much the same. We can see some other firms trying to set up in line with the agreements or with the opportunities that the AfCFTA is providing. So I think that is very positive for the firm, and I think that we should look out for more of these opportunities provided under the AfCFTA.
Appreciate all of this, Chima Kadike. Thanks a great deal for that. Agnes, I'll come to you with the IMF latest world economic outlook that we're all looking forward to? Any forward guidance from you?
Don't hold your breath. I think early in January we saw a 5.5 prospected growth for the global economy. Since then we've had the vaccination, although it has been unequal and, in my view, incomplete, with only the advanced economies having access to the vaccine, and developing countries, particularly in Africa, really lagging behind in this. We've seen a second wave of COVID-19, third wave, or whatever wave you'd want to call it, in most countries, Europe, and some parts of Africa. So for me, I think what I'm expecting, obviously, will probably be in line with what we saw in January. Global growth that is unequal, with some countries like China and others in Africa doing work better than the others. But I'm hopeful that with the continued rollout of the vaccination and continued conversation on the advanced economies really taking a responsibility and ensuring that everybody has access to vaccination. So I guess it'll be a little bit brighter or positive compared to what we had in January, but I'm not holding my breath. And these are just figures. Obviously, as we know, any shock will affect, as we saw with COVID, any external shock will affect our society, as we saw, because we as I said, we are very uncoordinated, and some people tend to do better. And what we forget that if advanced economies are well ahead than developing countries, and we pull everybody down. So holding my breath or not holding my breath to see what will come out of this, but I guess the visions across most countries are really towards a recovery. Every country has their own strategy in place towards. And I think that's what everybody's looking at. What can we do as countries? What can we do as a global society to get out of this crisis that we've had for the last 1 year? So not holding my breath. I'm not expecting anything great, really.
But at least there's a consensus among analyst community right now that the report is certainly going to touch on the vaccination and, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you for your wonderful analysis, Agnes. I appreciate that. Now let's move on to the Southern African headlines we've got before us. As South Africa collects some 1.25 trillion rand in taxes in the 2020-2021 fiscal year. Namibia's largest furniture company, Nictos, now accepting cryptocurrencies. Zimbabwe's BAT, that's British American Tobacco reports, smoking 40% year-on-year hike to 2.1 billion Zimbabwean dollars. You have SA evacuating some citizens from Mozambique's insurgent northern part of that country. AB InBev also opens $180 billion new brewery plants in Mozambique. And of course, the Botswana Stock Exchange has got Crestos Group revenues dipping by 49% to 202.6 million pula in 2020. Chima, you are the head of consumer goods in your firm. That's Vertical Capital Management. I know you will certainly be interested in maybe expansion to Mozambique. Your thoughts on this?
Yes, I think it's very interesting to see. Although, so we know that the value of the plant is about $180 million.
Yeah.
We don't know. Well, I don't know the capacity of the plant as at now in terms of hectoliters per annum, but I know that if we compare it to what happened in Nigeria, we saw in 2018 they invested about $250 million in their Shagamu plant to produce to build a new brewery plant. Well, the capacity for that plant as well was not mentioned. We know that they had said that I was their second largest plant in Africa, which by my estimation puts it around 8.8 million hectoliters per annum, which is very significant. And we saw the wonders it did for AB InBev or for international breweries in Nigeria in terms of putting out their volumes. In the western part of Nigeria, we saw that Trophy became solidified its number one position in the brewery market. We also saw how it helped them with the other products, their malting and other products, Budweiser as well in Lagos and in Nigeria as a whole. So I think it's very interesting to see. While I still don't know the capacity of this plant, I think it will do wonders for the company in their new in the new area where they're expanding into. And I think it's something that we should expect more of, because we can see that with NB or with Heineken and AB InBev and Carlsberg all competing for global market share and focusing more on PMEAs. I think that we should expect to see more of these investments as they target drinking low drinking capacity in these countries.
Also, with the mention of Heineken, because Heineken has also been in Mozambique for a while before the arrival or the inroads that AB InBev is just making there. So that's competition in that country is one thing that they will be grappling with. Agnes, do you want to make a comment around the adoption of cryptocurrency as a mean of exchange by some companies? That seems to be on the rise in recent times. If you got 1 minute for that quickly.
Sure. So it's interesting to see cryptos and being accepted across the world economy, and Namibia being the latest one. I really never understand the cryptocurrency. I've always tried to just ignore it, because I think the regulators will probably say, to some extent, say, look, enough is enough, and I'm always really scary. So perhaps not my forte to comment on it, but it's fascinating. Some countries are deregulating or cancelling crypto use. Others are saying, look, this is the way to go. But you know what? We cannot ignore. I think the financial world cannot ignore cryptos or bitcoins. I guess that's the way forward. And if you're not in it, I think this is the time to get into cryptos. And let me comment on Mozambique, if you let me.
Yeah, sure.
South Africa is evacuating their citizens following the insurgents in Palma, where I think there's oil and gas finds in Mozambique. This for me has been quite interesting. It's been simmering for about 2 years now, and whenever there's some resources, and you see Nigeria, in the northern part of Nigeria, whenever there's resources, we see so much poverty and so much destruction. Whereas big corporations like Total and other oil and gas companies are still operating, you see. I think, how can Mozambique be able to benefit from their gas find at the same time and benefit the locals? And whenever the locals look, these contracts or these agreements, we were not consulted. What do we call them? We call them insurgents or terrorists. You know, in my view, if we want investment to be sustainable, local stakeholders must be involved in every discussion on every deal. I guess you can't involve anybody, but I think they must benefit from their resources, because this is their local area. Obviously, it's been concerning. About hundreds thousands of people have fled the area, and initially the insurgents had taken over the Palma region, which is very close to Cabo Delgado, where there is the gas find. But now the government has taken back this area, and this is the border between Tanzania and Mozambique, and it's quite a concern. It's going to destabilize that region, but as much as we're dealing with insurgents and as much as we're dealing with this terrorism, the root issue is the fact that the resources really rarely benefit the locals, and this is the conversation we should be discussing. And also that corporations like Total and other big oil and gas companies, when they're going to invest in these countries, building an iron shack clinic or providing clean water, that's not investing in people. Or ticking box and say you've done your ESG, that's not investing in people. If their investment is going to be sustainable, you have to ensure that they listen to the local people. We're really calling them terrorists or insurgents. I think there are issues that need to be discussed, and I think governments and investors must be able to sit, and the local communities must sit on the table and see what is of benefit to the local people. And this is an issue we've seen across the African continent. It's not just Mozambique or northern part of Nigeria. It is everywhere where there are resources, then there's always a crisis. I think we need to find sustainable solutions.
Thank you for these comments and this analysis. We appreciate them, Agnes. Thanks a great deal for that. Ayo, let's quickly hear your final words on the Southern African headlines here before we close with the North African markets.
Okay. Interestingly, I think I would I'll speak on the Zimbabwe BAT, that's the British American Tobacco. So, based on the report, is that despite a lot of the anti-smoking policy by the government. They still in terms of the company have still been able to sell more, to generate more, and maybe don't know, maybe that may even be linked to maybe the lockdown restrictions in countries, giving more opportunity for time to take more. Yeah, so I think that's basically what I would just like to touch on. That Agnes has spoken on the Namibia. So the furniture, Nictos, which is the largest furniture company.
Yeah.
And I believe that we, like she rightly said, all economies may still have to come back and revisit this. We see what JP Morgan is already trying to add it to its asset classes for some of its qualified investors. So I believe that I think crypto also not shown a lot of interest with it in the past, and believe that now it's the time to at least understand it, even if you are not investing in it.
Right, and thank you, Video, for that, Ayodeji. Let's now finalize the show with the North African markets headlines. We've got East Steel reporting the loss of 50% year on year to 3 billion Egyptian pounds in 2020. CI Capital looking to launch 2 funds by year in 2021. Standards & Poor's cuts Morocco's rating to BB plus with a stable outlook, as of course Tunisian real estate firm SEETS is now looking to hold an extraordinary general meeting on April the 20th. That's what they by the end of the month. Chima, do you want to speak to the S&P cutting Morocco's rating? Just 1 or 2 comments, and then we'll wrap up the show.
If I could just pass on that segment, I'd like to speak instead on the Nigerian market and the performance for last week and how we expect it to go this week. So we saw last week that the market shed 73 bips, was down 73 bips week to date. Last week we saw a lot of sell-offs in the during the trading week, although it was just 4 trading days. We saw that for example sector was also it's close positive, but it could not leave the SI out into the positive region. We saw gains from stocks like USCM, Guinness, Nigerian Bills. We also saw international bills leading the pack as well. So for this week, because of the sell-offs we saw last week, we think that a lot of these stocks have gotten to desirable price levels for some investors. And we may see them coming to cherry pick on these stocks. So
there's going to be another 4-day trading week this period.
Yes,
thank you very much for that, Jim. Agnes, any final thoughts from you?
It's interesting for me. I think the headlines today on revenue collection, both in Kenya, Uganda, and South Africa. My thoughts are: how are these revenue collectors able to even find anything during this really hard time? I think for me, it speaks of innovation of the revenue authorities in these countries, that despite the crisis induced by COVID, that they've been able to continually collect revenue, which is good for the country. And I do hope, my hope is always that I hope that this is then channeled to the right public service. Again, on Mozambique is a story that will continue. It's being carried across the headlines, the FT and the big international papers, because of the interest of the oil and gas project, a multi-billion project. I think that will be in the headlines for the coming years, but for the coming months, unless we find a lasting solution. But all in all, I think it's a good start to the week. The African stories are looking slightly positive, which is good.
And I do hope that the policymakers and, of course, governments, politicians generally all listen to analysts like you so they can make wise decisions and resolve all of those challenges before us in Africa. Thank you so much, ladies, for your presence on the show this morning. I appreciate your presence. Thanks a great deal. Chima Okaduke, consumer goods analyst with Principal Capital Management in Nigeria. Thanks a great deal for your insights. We appreciate your presence as well. The managing partners, GPS Africa, Agnes Gital. Thank you so much for your wonderful and rich analysis on the show this morning. Ayodeji Ebo of Chapel Hill Denham in Nigeria in absentia at this point in time. We appreciate him and of course his analysis as well. Thank you so much, ladies, for holding forth till the end of the show. I appreciate your time and do have a profitable week ahead. This has been Frontier Printer for today. I'm Temple Ashaji. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.